have Alan Bishop, who's the director of sports performance at University of Houston, which currently, as of this podcast, is ranked #1 in the country for men's basketball. So big cheers, shout out to you guys for obviously a hell of a start. I'm really grateful that you're here. We've connected quite a bit on Instagram, which has been super cool. So I think the easiest conversation point to start with you is what actually got you down the path of becoming an SNC? Because I think we're both not in the school world, which is very different than like where you are versus like even the pro world and even like the private world. They're so different, and I think a lot of people don't realize how different institution versus professional versus private practice really can be. So what really got you into SNC and going down the path that you're in?
Yeah, so there's kind of long answer, short answer to all that, but I signed to play ball. I was always a big weight room guy when I was in high school. I actually started lifting weights, not very structured looking back, but started lifting weights, back in middle school. It's kind of funny. I'd say when my lifting started formally, my dad was actually stationed in Japan, and we had a wrestling team, and we had, little weight room on the base. And so every once in a while, I just kind of sneak in there, do some bench presses, do something, just didn't really know what I was doing. But then, when I was wrestling in middle school, we had a soldier who was our wrestling coach. And this guy, not to unsupport the troops, but he was not very good at soldiering. So they had assigned him to a bunch of different things. He was kind of one of those ones nobody wanted to be around. He'd find a way to get everybody in trouble. So I think at some point they had kind of kicked him out of everything and assigned him to sort mail at the post office, like for the duration of his duty assignment over there. And he needed to make a little money, so he became our wrestling coach. I think it was like a $500 stipend. The dude was dating a couple of my teammates' sisters. I mean, it was just kind of this wild deal, right? I mean, it was crazy. But anyways, for practice, we start at the middle school. We would, in formation, run to the base gym, and we would lift weights. And that was our practice. And he was like straight out of New Jersey, fist pumping type dude, kind of Jersey Shore-esque. But and so it was a little more structured, doing that. We a lot of circuits, and I just really enjoyed it, man. I just really kind of loved, pumping iron and doing that. We'd get done and we'd jog back, and hey, that was practice for the day. Some days we'd actually wrestle, some days we'd go lift, and so that was kind of the intro. And so I kind of fell in love with it there, and then we moved back to Texas. My dad got stationed in Texas, and if you know anything about Texas, it is football country, weight room country. The strength and conditioning at the high school level here is next level. The weight rooms, next level. They just really kind of lead the charge from the front on that side of things. And so got into something much more structured, much more regimented, true strength, conditioning, speed development, all those things. Really fell in love with it. My dad got stationed in Alabama. So at that point, moving again, same thing, just always kind of grouped in with the dudes who love the weight room. And then when I went off to school, this is my, 18-year-old self, I knew I wanted to make a lot of money. So I had no idea how people made money, but I knew banks had a lot of money. So I figured if I worked at a bank, I would get rich. I'm signed up for all my classes. I'm in like accounting. I'm in all these things. My first semester, and what I didn't realize at the time is, you meet these coaches when you get recruited, but my brain didn't quite connect it that the strength coaches, they also don't coach football. They are strictly weight room guys. But even in high school, you have your head strength coach, but he's also maybe the D-line coach, right? So it's kind of a dual role. And so I get up to Utah State where I played ball, and I kind of connected those dots, and I'm like, wait a minute, these guys, they hang out in a weight room. They literally teach people to lift weights for a living. In my mind, I'm also like, these guys are probably lifting weights 3-4 hours a day, getting paid for it. This is awesome. Not quite understanding the hours and the time that goes into it and everything else. But, I mean, within, I don't know, 7 to 10 days, maybe 2 weeks tops, I was like, you know what, I'm not doing this business major. Like, these accounting classes are absolutely not what I want to do. I want to do what those guys do. Because really at the time, I'm kind of looking around and, I've said this to people and they think I've, been joking about it. I'm not joking about it. I really, my mind was thinking, man, like these guys literally get to wear free Nike gear and they get to teach us how to lift weights. And they listen to music all day long, like, and they work in a weight room. Like, why isn't everybody doing this? Like, do people not know that this is a job? This is like the greatest job ever. And again, that's my 18-year-old self talking, and I still feel that way quite a bit. Try to be a little more pragmatic about the approach of how we train people than just showing up wearing Nikes and turning the music on loud and, clanging and banging. But no, that was just kind of the start. And so I immediately switched over to an exercise science. I tell people I'm just a very glorified PE teacher. And yeah, man, that's how it got going. I decided that's what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I'd hoped, maybe I'd go to the NFL first or, go play professional. At the time there's still, some NFL Europe and some things like that. But, that was kind of the thought. Got done playing, was, I told this to other people too. And again, not joking. I got a comment one time that was, kind of a joke when I went back to work at my alma mater at Utah State. Jokingly, someone said, yeah, this is Alan Bishop. He played here. He was a pretty mediocre guy. So he got into strength and conditioning. And I was like, I think someone describing my career as mediocre is the best compliment I've ever received. Like, I don't think I was that good. So, so it was just one of those deals. But I think I started in a unique way. The way the field's going now, a lot of really big schools, you have interns, you have fellows, you have paid interns, paid fellows, paid professional intern, but whatever you want to call them. But, you really have a lot of people that don't have a lot of responsibilities, but you go to some of the smaller schools, and that's where I started, was at a school called Southern Utah University. Just when you're a former student athlete, there is an advantage you have if you want to get into college coaching. And that's when you need someone to help you get your foot in the door. They know if they want to recommend you or not. If you're a dude that was always late, always a problem, always, a character issue guy, work ethic guy, they're not going to put their name on you to get into coaching. But we had a coaching change going into my senior year. The new head coach had previously been a head coach at Southern Utah. He had hired the head coach who was still there. I'm sorry, the head strength coach who was still there. And, I just kind of walked in one day and I said, hey, this is what I want to do. I talked with the strength staff, kind of got their advice, and they were like, hey, you've been training with us for the last 5 years. You know a lot about this. Go do something completely different, man. Go learn something new. Go see another way to do things. So I went up to the coach and just kind of asked him, hey, can you get me connected down there with your guys at SUU? This is what I want to do. And yeah, man, he got me connected and started at SUU. And it's funny, the reason he wanted to connect me with those guys to begin with, all the good things. I was always I was a really hardworking guy, high character guy, I think. Always trying to do things the right way. So that was not an issue for him to recommend me. But we were in film session one time and we're about to play another school. And as we're playing them, and I'm a defensive lineman, we're kind of breaking it down. And I had made a comment. I was like, "Coach, we just got to bull rush these guys. Like, you can look at them, they're kind of real light in the ass. They play high, and because they leg press, they don't squat." And I remember he looked up at me and I was kind of sitting wherever everyone kind of turns and looks at me and I'm like, yeah, they leg press, they don't squat, man. They don't, they're not very strong. And he's like, dude, how do you know that? I was like, well, not everybody knew that. Like, yeah, that's what they do at that school, man. That's how they train. It's just one of those things when you play, you got friends that play everywhere. You hear about different training styles. Like for me, if I saw anything about strength and conditioning on like the ESPN website, if something popped up on TV, if I read about it in Sports Illustrated, a magazine, anything, like, I mean, I was just glued into it. And so I just knew that school specifically, that's how they trained. And that was in my mind at the time. We squat, they leg press, let's bull rush them. We'll get to the quarterback, blah, blah, blah. So the head coach, in his mind, he's looking at it like, and he actually asked me at the time, hey, what are you gonna do? And I was like, I'm gonna be a strength coach. He's like, that is the right career for you, man. Like, we just kind of kept going. But so he felt good and he knew I was invested. I was passionate. It's what I wanted to do. So started out at a really small school called Southern Utah. There was a head coach. I was the first ever paid assistant. We had about 400 student athletes. When I got there, we had 8 racks, 8 platforms, half a set of dumbbells. Baseball started at 5:30 in the morning, and we rolled all the way through till track and field started, 5:30, 6:30 at night. So, I mean, it's really, really long days. You get a lot of opportunities to kind of perfect your craft. So, made a lot of mistakes. Luckily, the mistakes are more, maybe programming. Hey, should have done X instead of Y. Next time, let's do Z first. Just little things. But you get a chance to make those mistakes when you have a lot of athletes you're working with. And you really get to start learning, what do you believe in? And it's funny because even things I'm still doing today, I look back and it's, a lot of it stems from, what did you learn working with the volleyball team at 8:00 in the morning back when you were at Southern Utah in 2010? Well, here's part of the pull-up progression we were doing. We had an entire team of volleyball players that could do strict chin-ups. That's something I've always taken a lot of pride in as I've been coaching is, especially my women's teams. Look, we're going to be great at push-ups, great at pull-ups, great at some of these things that, a lot of times there's, maybe a little more challenging for female student athletes than the upper body strength. But I can go all the way back to that time with volleyball, at Southern Utah and kind of tweaking some chin-up progressions. So left Southern Utah, went out to the University of Texas at Arlington. At Southern Utah, like I said, it was all hands on deck, every sport. So, I'm the top football assistant. I'm running maybe 4 or 5 other teams. And we were able to grow the staff before I left, added a grad assistant, added a little bit of money into the department, went out to UT Arlington and there I was strictly basketball, men's and women's basketball. I love that job. I love the people I worked with. But in the world of coaching, you never know when the next opportunity is going to present itself. So I was there for about a year, and then I actually went back to my alma mater at Utah State. And a lot of people don't realize this, but in 2013, I mean, this is Mountain West school. There's resources. It's Division I. It's where you would, for me, it was a massive promotion to go from, a small school like Southern Utah to a less small school like UT Arlington to now, like I'm in the big time, man. I'm in the Mountain West. I'm at Utah State University coaching. Well, there was only 2 of us full time. And so there's only 2 full-time benefited guys. We had a third coach who was absolutely working full-time hours, but he was a quote unquote part-time. I think for about a year until that got turned into a full-time, and we had 2 GAs. So we had 5 staff members running those 400 student athletes, and this was back 2013, 14, something like that. 2013, I think. So it a lot of hours, a lot of work. Again, one big weight room, but we had a whole lot of teams and a whole lot of athletes to get through there. And so was there for about 4 years. During that time, accepted a promotion. We grew the staff again. There were some great lessons in there and really how to run a department and increase, your resources, how to add so much value that they want to pour back into the staff and invest back into it. And the guy I was working for out there, Dave Scholes, is currently at Louisiana Tech, just a high level guy in that world of teaching me a lot of lessons of how to do things the right way. And then right before I left, I was promoted to the director of Olympic sports. So now I got to oversee everything but football. And then was there for about a year and then just had, kind of the opportunity of a lifetime to come and work for the guy I'm working for at the University of Houston. And, again, if you ever heard me on a podcast or if you ever, see me kind of going back and forth with, banter on Twitter or something like that, I say it often. If you're ever afforded the opportunity, pick your head coach the right way. There's a time and a place in your career where you just have to take whatever you can get. Mm-hmm. If Southern Utah and Southern Cal, USC were both being offered at the same time, I would have gone to USC, right? But SUU was the only opportunity I had. You know what? I was going to use that thing as a springboard. Mm-hmm. I was going to work my butt off, coach my face off, and then use that to, grow in my career. And so, yeah, Utah State, like I said, took that Olympic director opportunity. Oh, I wish we could have been there a little bit longer. But you never know when the next opportunity presents itself. And that just so happened to be here at Houston. Been here for, this is my 6th season. And we've man, I mean, just a great culture, great head coach to work for, great staff. I mean, I cannot speak highly enough about how this place operates, the standards in place, the expectations, the quality of the kids we recruit. It's just such, there's a reason we're having the success we're having.
Mhm.
And so, again, who knows what the future holds, but one thing in strength and conditioning is, it's becoming a little more common, but it's still less common than it is common. Is, I signed a 3-year deal to stick around here for a while. I've had some opportunities to go other places. As of right now, it's zero interest in that, man. Just love working with these kids, working with this staff, and yeah, man, hope to be here for a while.
That's dope, man. I mean, like, it's so cool to see. I mean, how many years of experience too, right? And I think one of the cool parts is that you've been able to work with, I'm sure, so many athletes, like you said, overseeing 400 student athletes at 2 different schools, correct? And at
4 schools now.
4 schools now. Yeah.
4, yeah.
That's crazy. And I think it's cool because you get to experience coaching strength and conditioning for so many different sports, right? And now your main focus being basketball. I'm very curious, amongst your experience working with so many sports, what have you been really able to take away from, like you said, with volleyball, it's like push-ups, chin-ups. It's like, what have you been able to take away from working with such a wide variety of sports to now focus on what you're doing now with the basketball boys?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm gonna play a mind game with you real quick. I had somebody ask me this one time, and thought about it, answered it, went back and forth a little bit, but I think it holds true. And that's, the question was, Division I cross country runners, okay, are they skinny because they run, or do they run because they're skinny? Right? It's a good question. Are they skinny because they run, or do they run because they're skinny?
It's both, right? It's if you think about it, it's got to be some degree of both. Though, right?
Yeah, they're very slow twitch, muscle fiber dominant in what they do for their sport. So I don't think maybe they're training much for strength and power. So that's kind of where my head is going.
That's fair. Well, I'll say this. Okay, let's look at body types, and I'll tell you where I'm going with this. Okay, so I was a defensive lineman. Okay, I played, my heaviest, I was probably a buffet away from 300 pounds, right? I was in the mid to high 290s. But I've got slightly, I've got narrow hips relative to my chest width. But so for example, when I got my suit, made your senior year, the school I was at, they buy you a suit as part of your, hey, when you're going to go interview, we're setting you up for success. My waist was a 38 and my chest was a 52. So, I mean, I actually had to buy 2 suits, one for the pants, one for the top. So my body type, I was very, very big chested, had narrower hips, but a 38 waist is not that narrow, right? So I got a body type where I was a defensive lineman. I had to put my hand in the ground. I would sit there and wait, and I would explode into hitting someone. Well, I would try to explode. Like I said, I was mediocre at best, but you rewarded for, acceleration, not necessarily rewarded for velocity. Whereas like you take a receiver who's going to have a narrower build, doesn't carry as much weight, they're going to be better at utilize a stretch shortening cycle. They're going to be better at top end speeds, velocity. Doesn't mean they're not good at acceleration, but they can utilize their body type and utilize how the body works better in one area than I can. So going back to that question, if you were an elite level cross-country runner, I firmly believe that the sport picks you, the position picks you. Okay, there's not a soul on the planet playing wide receiver that looks like me. Okay, and there's not a defensive tackle on the planet that looks like the cross-country runner we were just talking about. At least that's any good. Okay, and so when you start looking at it like that, I think one of the big differences that I have compared to a lot of other people is I really take into account body type for training. So if you're somebody like me, I've got about a 6'5" wingspan, but I got that 52-inch chest. I've actually got super short arms. My arms are only like that of a 6'1" person, even though I got a 6'5" wingspan. But I've got really, really broad shoulders. And so you think about it, like let's go to a bench press, for example. When I go down to touch my chest, my elbow doesn't even go past my back. So it is very, very tricep dominant. I actually don't get a lot of chest work out of doing a bench press. It looks like a floor press. But if you take the guys I work with, I've got a kid on my team who's a 6 foot, about 6'7.5", and he's got a 7'5" wingspan. So now let's think about the bench press for him. He goes down to touch his chest, his elbow's scraping the floor, and he's getting a ton of stretch in those fibers. He's building up a lot of tension through his chest. But his triceps are now the weak point. So the exact same exercise on two body types are going to give you a different result. But take that same guy, so maybe he's disadvantageous in the press where I would be advantageous. But let's say we got to put some size on a kid with that same body type, that really long wingspan. Well, if it was me, again, I've got shorter arms. So if I'm doing like a straight ahead seated row or a single arm dumbbell row, there's not a ton of range of motion in there. So I can get really strong, but I'm probably not going to put on a good size with that. But if I do like a high handle lat pull down or like the hammer strength, I've created a lot more range of motion. That range, that tension, that more, it's not necessarily just the time under tension, but working through a higher intensity with that time under tension, it's going to be a little bit more beneficial for me to put on some size. Whereas now I can say that same guy who's got the 7'5" wingspan, he should probably just be doing a seated row. He's going to get enough range there that he can use a heavier load for that range. Whereas if he does that high lat pull down, I'm not saying there's not a good time and a place. Long-term shoulder health is probably a lot more predicated on what you can do, in a vertical, not a horizontal position. But he's going to want to train a little different. Or let's go to a squat, for example. When you got that real short torso and you have really, really long legs, really long arms, you kind of got that daddy long leg body type, well, your squat's going to be a lot more kind of as a bastardized good morning, right? You really have to hinge to keep the bar in position over your foot. Whereas for me, I sit down into a squat and like my chest is straight up in the air, right? Because I got super long torso and I'm like the opposite of how you want an athlete to look. I got short arms, short legs, really long torso. I'm kind of like a wiener dog, right? I'm kind of like a T-Rex. Like we want guys like pterodactyls, big long wingspans, right? So that same guy, if we're doing a squat, he's going to be super posterior chain dominant. He's going to be great at hinging, but his quads are now going to be the weak point. So if you're putting together a program and you say, hey, we want to do some volume accumulation, let's do it in a weak point so that when we move to some intensification, we're really trying to get a guy strong. Now we want to move to what makes him special and where he is advantageous. Well, maybe that might look like, hey, let's get his quads, in a very quad dominant exercise, like a heels elevated front squat, like a front foot elevated split squat. Those guys with long legs, man, that's one of the best things you can do for them. And then when it's time to say, hey, time for intensification, let's jack this load up, jack the intensity up. Maybe we want to go to a trap bar deadlift, right? I mean, it's one of those things where for me, hey, maybe we want to do, maybe we want to do something a little more posterior chain dominant when I'm doing my training. And then when it's time to get strong and move some weight, hey, we're just getting right back into that squat. So to me, that's the thing where you start saying, well, hey, what does a volleyball player look like? What are their, weaknesses or strength? But I like to look at where are they advantageous, where are they least advantageous? And the same thing would apply, for my guys. So with basketball, for example, if we know that you got really, really long arms, you're probably going to want to do a little bit more elbow dominant work, like direct arm work with curls, triceps, like decline tricep extensions, for example. One of my favorite exercises for the guys, you're on a decline, easy bar, dumbbells, whatever. Well, there's a constant tension through the tricep. Whereas for me, again, I got short arms. I probably would be getting better work doing bench press than doing maybe direct tricep work because I'm going to be able to overload them a whole lot more. And so to me, that's one of the biggest things. And then take it out of the weight room, right? Like, let's say you got the body type with the really, really wide hips. Again, think lineman, someone inside the box of football versus the real narrow framed, tall, skinny. Well, what are they rewarded by? Where are they advantageous? Well, someone like me, I'm going to have a longer ground contact time to apply more force into the ground. I'm going to be better at acceleration, where those guys are going to be better at velocity, right? And so, like, some people will say, are they a strength dominant or are they, more elastic? So there's a lot of different kind of ways to describe body types, but you can actually train players a lot of times just based off their body type. And when you start kind of connecting those dots of, okay, this wrestler, this, women's basketball player, the soccer player, this baseball guy, this football guy, I think you kind of start going back to that original question of, are they skinny because they run, or do they run because they're skinny? You're right. At the end of the day, the reality of the nuance, it's probably a little bit of both. But I do think that, the position picks you, the sport picks you. For all I know, Danny DeVito's got the best hook shot in the world, but I doubt Danny DeVito, if he trained for 100 straight years, would ever beat LeBron James in a one-on-one contest. It's just not what his body, the sport's not going to reward his body type. Right. And so if you're saying it from that standpoint, that's probably one of the bigger takeaways. And, and then when it really starts getting fun is when you start watching them play the game and you start kind of spinning your wheels about, oh man, maybe if we incorporate some single leg squats and drive up his single leg strength, we're going to be a little bit better, put a foot in the ground, cover a little more ground if we're playing defense, showing our hands, big chest, and just a little more strength, apply a little bit more force, we're going to defend a little bit better. But the single leg squat's only a part of that. How do you get from point A all the way to point Z from transferring from the weight room to some drills into the sport? And so to me, again, that's where, like if we're talking maybe soccer, I'm just not overly as familiar with the game of soccer. Lacrosse, not familiar with it at all. Could I train those guys? Yeah, there's, or those, gals. Yeah, absolutely. There's going to be some common occurrences between body types, and there's going to be some attributes we're going to want to saturate: speed, acceleration, power, strength, whatever that might be, kind of to the man of what that person needs. But I'd say this one thing that I feel really good about it: if I'm watching the game of football, if I'm watching the game of basketball, as much time as I have spent around it, I feel like I can kind of take what I think they need from a health standpoint, from a performance standpoint, from their body type. How do we saturate attributes? But then most importantly, how do we make sure this transfers back to the actual sport? Because never forget, if having the biggest, bench press in the room or having the biggest squat in the room was the key to your success, like, dude, I'd be in the NBA right now, right? Like that's not how it works. It's about saturating attributes to make kids the best version of themselves within their sport.
I love that. I think you make a really good point, like kind of talking about how you've worked with all these different sports, and like we've been fortunate enough to have experiences with sports, powerlifting, bodybuilding, even some Olympic lifting. And I think that the beauty of what you said is like, it doesn't mean I don't have you do a specific movement. I just also understand that in order for you to do the specific movement, maybe with the same range of motion as the next person, might require some adjustments. Right. And I think that's something you and I had talked a few days back about this when we had a quick call. One of the things I really appreciate about what you do is when I watch you train people in the gym, whether it's the 6'8", 6'10" guy, who's the big guy, or the 6'1", 6'2" guy, it's not a reason not to train the full ranges of motion, which I notice in the sports world is very, very missed. And we have a lot of bodybuilders we work with too. So that's like that's another thing that seems to be missing in bodybuilding. But I love that you're like, okay, you're 7 foot, cool. We might just have to put you on some wedges to get that same range of motion. My 6'1" point guard might not need to do that. Talk to us a little bit about that specifically. Like, what is it, your standpoint, training full RUM? Why is that beneficial? Because I'm aware, and I see it all the time in sports, there's this never-ending argument about, oh, you should only be training partial ranges of motion, which they have a place, don't get me wrong. But a lot of people will just push on, hey, it's not sports specific to do full RUM. And I'm like, there's so many benefits to it. I'm not looking to make him a bodybuilder, but he's probably going to get some pretty good benefits out of it.
Yeah. So great question. And that's what you asked about training guys through full ranges is one that a lot of people ask me, and a lot of people have questions on why, how, blah, blah, blah. But here's what I'll say. Couple things. Health is always going to drive performance. Okay. If you are a healthy individual, Let's not get into the what if million hypotheticals of, you know, orthopedic issues we need to work around. Hey, this kid broke his ankle back in middle school. He didn't rehab it. What are you going to do with him? Dude, I don't know. That's a hypothetical. Let's just say right now you have a healthy individual. They should be able to squat down into a full range, you know, push their knee over their toe, close off the knee joint, keep a vertical chest, and stand right back up. Okay. So it's not like that's an unhealthy movement. But again, kind of working some more thoughts through this. There's I 100%, there's a time and a place for partial rep. So if you know, kind of dig through any of my feed, you'll see us doing pin squats, you know, inertia squats, where it's from a dead stop. And we actually have some technology we use with force plates and, you know, video of how we break down the jumps, how we apply force, where peak forces are applied, blah, blah, blah. We'll actually try to line it up. So if we're doing depth drops, if we're doing plyometrics, if we're doing squats from a pin, we actually try to line it up to the hip, knee, ankle, you know, joint angles of where they're going to produce the most power as they're getting into their jump, etc. But there's a time and a place for that, especially if you're peaking. And I think the nuance, like you said, professional sport, college sport, high school sport. Well, what if you're a 100-meter sprinter? Well, that's probably going to be a little bit different than what if you're a developmental basketball player who needs to put on 30 pounds, right? So there's always nuance to everything. But there is absolutely a time and a place for peaking. Strength is very joint angle specific. Tissue adaptation, very, very range of motion specific, okay? And so for me, when I'm looking at it, I like to tell people this, okay? And I'm going to get your brain turning again with some crazy analogy. Who knows if it works or not, but works for me. If you go all around the country here in the US and you go to any Gold's Gym in America, there's probably 50 dudes in there, 100 dudes in there, whatever, that can put 405 on their back and squat it down 6 inches and come back up, right? Well, okay, cool. They can probably do that with 500 pounds too. But if you tell that guy who can do that with 400 pounds, hey, that 405 6-inch squat, let's take that, or you know what, let's do the 500. You got a guy who can do a quarter squat with 500 pounds. We'll take it down to 405. Those 100 dudes who can 500 partial squat, very few of them can full range 405. But you go to any gym in America and find me someone who can full range squat 405, I guarantee you they can partial rep 500. Guarantee. I'll put whatever amount of money you want to bet. Let's do it, right? And there's a lot of things that transfer that way. So think of it like a front squat. Again, go to that 400-pound back squat. There's way a lot of people in this world who can full depth squat 400 pounds. There's a lot less that can, you know, front squat 315, for example. And just because you can back squat 405, it doesn't mean you can front squat 315. But if you can front squat 315, I guarantee you can back squat 405. Right. So there's little things like that. And so for me, when I'm looking at it, I think there's maybe a little more value in a front squat, maybe to a back squat, because one carries over to the other doesn't necessarily carry over to the first. Now, there's definitely a time and place to kind of go back and forth and use them to progress and overload and have a well-rounded program. But if all you ever do is back squat, it really doesn't mean your front squat's going to be elite. But if all you ever do is front squat, you're probably still going to have a really good back squat. And the same is going to be true with full range. If all you ever do is full range train, and remember, these guys are strength generalists. If you're talking about a power lifter, that's a strength specialist. If you're talking about a strongman, that is a strength specialist. Our guys are strength generalists. And so for them, if you say, hey, you can only full range squat 200 pounds, right? You've never been asked to do it. Maybe you're just not quite built for it. Maybe you're just not overly strong. Okay. Well, if we go from 200 to 220, that partial rep has also gone up. You go from 220 to 250, your partial rep has also gone up. And that's going to progress for a really, really long time. And as long as your full range strength is going up, your partial rep is going to go up with it. But the opposite is not true. If all we do is go into the gym and do 5 board bench presses where we're just moving at 3 inches, or if all we ever do is go in the gym and do quarter squats, well, you're going to try to do a full range squat with any meaningful weight, you're going to get pinned. You're going to try to bench press, you're going to get stapled to your chest. And so to me, that's where there's carryover from full range to partial. there is a time and a place to use partial to help build your full range, especially when you start talking about weak point training or maybe overloading the strength curve, something like that. But I think one's going to carry over to the other for a really long time, especially with strength generalists. Now, if you're talking about the football guy that can, front squat 600 pounds, okay, that is a freak of nature. Let's not go to him. Everyone wants to use that guy. No, dude, I got a room full of dudes who can't do that. They are generalists. They are great at the game of basketball, and they need attributes like speed, like power, like acceleration, like top end velocity. They need these attributes to help be better at their sport. So, so again, is there a time and a place for partial rep? Absolutely. But don't disservice your athletes by getting to those partial rep training, too quick. And then all of a sudden you're kind of blunting their other development. So that's again, kind of in the nutshell. If you wanted to keep diving more and more, I don't like getting a ton into the structural balance side of things. Well, what about your vastus lateralis versus your vastus medialis? All I'll say is this: when you got guys that squat all the way down, when you roll it out on a court, you can tell the guys that train through ranges and the guys that don't. And I like to roll the ball out, and those guys know that we get after it. So.
Yeah, I love it. I'm curious if in previous times, right, and we've definitely seen, our athletes, especially when it's strength based or even hypertrophy based, and even for myself personally, prior mistakes have been training a lot in partial ranges and hurting ourselves or getting injured. And so for your guys, like you said, it's very important to stay fast, to stay agile, to have high velocity. And so training in those full ranges of motion, I'm sure you've been able to see, sure, we can create the same amount of intramuscular force output without necessarily having to load up a ton of external load, which I'm sure has kept your athletes safer. But I'm on your page right now, and I've seen over the course of 1 year, a dude pack on 15 pounds, which is cool because you're not necessarily focusing on purely hypertrophy. Although I'd say 15 pounds where he looks leaner, that's quite a lot of tissue over the course of the year, right? And for a sport that is focused on staying fast, staying agile, I think a lot of people like to think, oh, you can't put on that much size as a basketball player, right? So how is something like that made possible? Because when I saw that, I'm like, okay, I'm super, super interested because I don't think you bodybuilding trained them, but it looks like you did.
No. Yes. Okay. So when you talk about them being lean, this might be a little bit, I won't say controversial, but just remember there's nuance to everything. The way we recruit length, and we recruit guards that can get out and boogie. We recruit big men that can rim run. We value athleticism. And, especially here in the US, that's maybe one of the differences when you talk about the European style of play and the American style of play is we're going to reward our game with more athleticism. They like to think that they're more skilled and they make less mistakes, and it's, more the fundamental game. Now they're still doing it at a very, very high level. But the kind of kids we recruit are freakishly athletic. Okay. And most of them don't have a big background in training. Most of them don't have a big background in nutrition, for example. Not to say that, their parents didn't feed them or something like that, but there's a reality that, that Western diet, that standard American diet is probably not the best way to be lean and, get jacked and do those things. But where I'm going to say this is controversial. Okay. I don't want my guys running around trying to be, Olympia ready, 3%. That's not the case. But we know that there's going to be a better hormonal response to everything, training, food, everything, when you're lean. So, I don't want to say it's the magic number, but every single player on our team is sub 10% body fat. Okay. Now those can be some tough conversations sometimes to have, and you got to be mature about it. You're not trying to body shame a kid or something crazy. That's definitely not the case. But when you talk about helping a kid become the best version of themselves, really the less excess stress you're carrying around with that excess body weight, the better. Okay. And now let's look at it like this. I like to give an analogy. Okay. Or I like to, again, if you haven't figured it out, my brain works in stories and trying to figure out different things, different ways. But the the city of Houston has a great distinction. We have surpassed Biloxi, Mississippi. We are the most, I'm going to say, robust city in America.
Amazing.
Awesome. We're number one, baby. And the U.S. has taken back the crown from Mexico. We are the most robust nation on the planet. Suck it, France. But anyway, no. But anyways, no. So I mean, so I'm in essentially the heaviest city in the heaviest country on the planet. If all we had to do was worry about calories, the key to getting big, strong, packing on mass is more and more calories. Yes, calories are important, but we are the most calorically surplus city in the most calorically surplus planet or country on the planet, right? So if we go outside, we should be surrounded by dudes that are, 3% body fat, 290, walking around like they're ready to be Mr. Olympia, if that's what it really takes, is just calories, calories, calories. And I think that's a little bit of a misstep to think the reason, guys aren't putting on size or guys aren't putting on muscle is they're just not getting in the right calories. Because I think the other thing is, this is not my opinion. This is off of numerous studies. And there's been a couple in the last few years that have come out that have been phenomenal. And now you're making me work off the top of my head. And like I said, I'm at like 70% right now. So I know someone's going to correct me in the comments. But there was a study done in the G League where they measured the omega-3 index. And I believe it was 119 G League players, right? So they're professional NBA players. And they also gave them a questionnaire asking how much fish they eat. Of those 119 G League, these are professional basketball players. There was 117 of them were deficient in their omega-3 index.
Wow.
One was insufficient. One was in range. Okay. So this is not just the average, high school, college, whatever. This is professional athletes. And so you could look at it, you could say, oh, that just proves it doesn't matter what your omega-3 index is. You can still play pro ball. Yeah, maybe. But it could also say, hey, and again, I'm going to speak a little bit out of turn because I'm not in the G League, I'm not in the NBA. But one of the things you see when college players leave college, go to the G League, in between going to the NBA, a lot of guys will lose weight, right? And most of those G League players are actually, 10, 15, 20 pounds lighter than their counterparts up in the NBA. So if the thing is, hey, we need to put this size on, but also the G League's a little bit of a faster game, a little different game than what you see in the NBA. But if you're saying, hey, we got to put size on, well, let's look at some other studies that have come out. Around the same time, a couple of years ago, there was a study that came out looking at NFL Combine invite athletes. And again, like, you have to be invited. You can't apply for that, right? Like, these are elite level dudes. And they were looking at magnesium status, omega-3 index, and vitamin D status. Okay, so these the best of the best, and I know I'm going to mix these up. I want to say 29 of the 30 were deficient in their omega-3. It was like 28 of the 30 were deficient in their magnesium, and like 27 of the 30 were deficient in their vitamin D. I think it was 29 of 30 omega-3, the magnesium, the vitamin D. That might be mixed up, but you kind of get the point, right? So maybe if we know that we're trying to put on size, and we know that here in Houston, Texas, there is not a lack of calories. There's not a magic bubble over the building where calories just cannot get in. Why are our guys so skinny? No, we probably need to clean up the blood panel a little bit. And let's probably pop the hood, see what's going on underneath the hood. And if we can say, hey, let's clean up your magnesium status, so maybe you're getting more meaningful recovery. You sleep better. Let's clean up that omega-3 index. So, hey, maybe, brain power, make some better decisions. Maybe tissue quality, we have a better response to training, better recovery, you feel better, you move, whatever that's going to look like. Vitamin D, let's clean that up. And all of a sudden now your androgen production may be a little bit better. Now there's obviously way more things at play than just that, but like we give out zinc as well, for example. And zinc's one of those, I heard it worded well. It was kind of likened, all trucks are vehicles, but not all vehicles are trucks. If you are, if your androgen production is lackluster, it doesn't mean you're zinc deficient. But if you're zinc deficient, your androgen production is going to be lackluster, right? Androgen levels. So from that standpoint, we look at it and we're saying, how do we clean things up and make this maybe a little bit more micronutrient based? And so for our guys, there's a heavy emphasis on the micronutrient side of things, not just, hey, we need to put size, let's get more, burgers, fries, and milkshake, right? I mean, like the calories are already there. Or the other big one for me, and this is one that I don't know how other people don't understand this. I don't know why this is a controversial thing, but when it comes to protein, for example, like I'm Meathead City, man. We are gonna eat protein. We're gonna push protein. But you look at it and you say, people want to argue about how important is the 30-minute window post training? Well, it's important. How important is the quality, grass fed versus not grass fed? Well, it's important. How important is the total quantity? Well, it's important. But let's look at them all, and kind of rank that out. Of all those things, the most important part is the total daily quantity. So if you have the highest quality, Pacific salmon coming fresh out the river with no pollution, and you're eating wild blueberries, you're doing all these things that are super nutrient dense, that's great. But if you're only eating 20 grams of protein a day, it's not going to help you, right? Even though it's high quality. So for me, we are making every meal, almost excessive in protein, because I want these guys to have options. I want them to make sure they're getting those amino acids in their system. It's not just from a recovery standpoint, it's from a building standpoint. Okay. After that, I think the quality of it is probably the next most important. And then after that is probably the timing of it. So for us, I don't necessarily get super geeked up and worked up of, hey, you got to take this at this exact time. This, again, I'm working with college students, man. Like, life's going to get in the way. There's tests, there's tutors, there's a social aspect to it. There's a lot of things involved, but we're going to make sure the total daily intake is high. We're going to try to have pretty good quality. And then, the timing of it, we're going to get that as dialed in as we can. Excuse me. I'm just not going to lose my mind necessarily about that. But then I'll always tell you this, if it's not quite going perfect, just remember when you're laying down your head to sleep at night, that most of these dudes can also probably eat cotton candy for breakfast and still be super lean and, still stay sub 10%. So just don't lose your mind over it. But no, I think you just, push the micronutrients, push the protein intake. Yeah. And then you got to be all in on it, man. If I'm just sitting there and I'm like, hey man, this is important, but it's completely up to you, while I'm sitting there eating a cupcake, like, why would you listen to me? I don't really mean it. And I'm not saying there's not a time and a place to have a cupcake or a cookie, but I care way more about it than the athletes do. And that's fine. That's how it should be. I care way more about what they do in the weight room than the athletes do. And that's fine. That's how it should be. But to me, the more all in you are, the more you believe in it, the more you're preaching it, the more you're there with your dudes, just, kind of living that life. Well, at least in the back of their mind, they're not saying, dude, this guy's full of shit. Like, he's telling me to eat steak and he's over there eating, hot dogs. What I'm saying? So to me, I think that's one of the big things too, is, I'm all in on it. And I get it, man. I know who I am. I know who I'm not. I love the science behind everything. I love all those aspects of the nuance. But dude, it's Meathead City over here, man. Like I believe in what we're doing. And you know what? And I'm cool with that too. I get older every year. These dudes keep staying the same age. Sometimes you get frustrated by that. As you get more mature with age, you wonder why you keep saying these same, dumb, silly mistakes, these, same silly comments, whatever it might be, year after year. But you just realize, man, you got to stay all in on this all the time, because next year, this is a new wave of dudes. The year after that, it's a new wave of dudes. So you really got to walk it like you talk it. Yeah. And again, does that mean that I'm not going to, sit down and have a glass of bourbon or something like that? No, not at all. But it's probably not a good idea for me to be on the road just slamming, Five Guys and In-N-Out Burger and then say, no, I'm eating this, but I got a pregame meal over there of salmon and chicken for you. So you guys do that. I'm going to do this.
It freaking hypes me up. And Far, you probably know it hypes me up to hear that, because for us, we get to work with bodybuilding athletes, competitors. Like, I just competed myself this last year, and even in the back of my head, it's like, and kind of what I want to ask you is how do you stay a consistent student of the game? And I think this is probably it, right? You walk the walk, you put yourself in the trenches, you're training, you're showing up, you're doing it, because it's not even for ourselves. Like, yes, we're Meathead City, and yes, we love this shit. But at the end of the day, sorry, you can block that out.
No, you're good, man. You're good.
I can block that out. But at the end of the day, it's like you're setting a standard and you're setting an example for your guys. And I think for you, you've probably been able to see that that's so important, and that's why you probably love it. But I'm curious, like, how have you stayed a consistent student of the game, even amidst your success and, working with the number one team in the country? How do you stay a consistent student?
Yeah, that's a great question. Here's what I'll say on this front. Again, I've got strengths. I've got things that I'm really good at, and I've got weaknesses, and I know I'm not great at them. And I've got things I'm super interested in, and I've got things that I just don't care. Right now, it's important. It's uninteresting to me. I don't care. Maybe I'm lukewarm on it. But for me, I go down rabbit holes. And again, I find this stuff fascinating. And so to me, as I'm looking at, different aspects of whether it's studies, whether it's, training techniques, new, quote unquote, new training methods, I just think it's super interesting. And there's a book, the author's last name is Beardsley. Probably leading the charge in hypertrophy, here, with all the research and just everything he's doing, man. He's really, really bright guy. That guy is a PhD expert in the field. I am a kindergarten student in my knowledge compared to him, right? But he put out a pretty good book about hypertrophy and some of the changes in how we view hypertrophy, maybe being a little bit more about tension, maybe a little bit less about damage, a few of these little tweaks, that, it ain't 1995 anymore. But I sent it to a buddy of mine who very, very, very intelligent, high level NFL guy. And I'm like, dude, you're going to love this book, man. And he's like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you telling me you don't know enough about that? Like, why aren't you reading more about, the latest research on force plates? Why aren't you reading a little bit more on the latest research on XYZ, man? Like, I'm telling you as a friend, I think that's where you need to grow. And my answer back was like, hey, I agree. And I'm working on those things too. I just really enjoyed this. Like this is what gets, kind of my head spinning and like, oh man, I didn't think about this. That would maybe explain this. I can now implement this method. Oh, so that's what gets my brain going a little bit. And it's not to say the other things aren't important. It's just maybe not as exciting to me. And so I don't want to say I'm biased. We all have our biases, but I like going down rabbit holes. And I think the deeper you go down rabbit holes on things you're really interested in, with the knowing, like, hey, don't get super tunnel visions. Go down this rabbit hole, trying to connect dots in other areas, and then kind of come out of the rabbit hole, zoom out. Hey, this is maybe how A connects to B, connects to C. And I think that's how, you can kind of continue to grow. Mm-hmm. So I mean, and again, I mean this sincerely when I say this. There's so much more that I have no idea. I am not an expert. I'm not qualified to be an expert. I just think I am pretty good at taking general information, applying some specific information, putting it together in training, combining, zooming out again. Well, how do we connect the nutrition to it? How can we connect some of the recovery to it? How can we make it holistic? And then whether the athlete understands it the same way I do, hey, you don't necessarily, if you're the athlete, you don't need to be a plumber to know that when you stand up, you just flush the toilet and everything disappears. I just need to know the basics, right? But you get the plumber to come in and fix it when there's a problem. And to me, I feel like it's kind of that same approach. For the athletes, just give them what they need to know. They do not want to have a PhD, in myofibrillar hypertrophy, right? They do not care about actin-myosin cross bridges. It is what it is. But for me, the more I can go down those rabbit holes, the more I can learn, the more I can then apply. Well, hey, now they have a better, version of themselves when they come out of the other side of training because we made a few little tweaks. And so again, I wish I had the right answer. Hey, start with book A, move to book B, go to book C. But what I would say is just deep dive, go all in on things you're interested in, because then you're going to learn it a little bit better. And then just kind of start working on your weaknesses out of there.
I love that. I'll ask another question. I know Chad will want to wrap with a specific question for you, but you use Chris Beardsley, like, and I love, he puts the strength and conditioning research out. He's fantastic. Like, there are things that I was like, shit, I'm completely wrong about this approach, and then there's shit that's like, okay, I put that together and it made sense, even though there wasn't that much research, and now there's something you see and it's like, okay, that's why it worked. Who are the people you go to? I know for Chad and I personally, like, Cal Dietz is a big person that I've learned a ton from. Andy Galpin's another guy who, I mean, he's as good as they come. Mike Israetel, Jared Feather. Who are some of the people that you kind of look to when you're going to learn? Because everybody I've learned in the sports world, they have their subset of people. Not that you won't learn from everybody, but there are some people that we just by nature have a tendency to lean towards.
Yeah, probably my favorite right now, and it's been this way for a little while. Right now is probably Christian Thibodeau. Okay. And I think part of that reason, I was trained as an athlete, and I want to make sure I word this the right way, because I feel like in the past I've not done a great job of representing, the how well maybe I knew him or learned from him. But I was brought up in a system that was heavily influenced by Charles Poliquin. And I was super fortunate to spend some time with Charles learning. We brought him out to Utah State, on a handful of occasions, went out and did different seminars with him, hung out with him at a few different events where he presented. But the way Charles presented things, it made sense. And then, I read Ian King early, like his Get Buffed. And so now I have, and Charles, I don't want to say he stole a lot of things or he borrowed, but you can tell there was a lot of influence of Ian King on Charles Poliquin. And then you can tell that even though it should evolve, right? If we were doing exactly what somebody did in 1995 today, well, you're probably doing something wrong. Like, there's ways to, different iterations make things better. But you can tell a lot of what Christian does. He took a lot of those really, really good things Charles was doing. He's added new things that have come out that are really good ways to do it, new research. But most importantly, if I need a mentor, if I need a teacher, it needs to be someone that I can learn from, because we all have different ways of learning. I'm a somewhat a non-traditional learner myself. And so when it comes to someone like Christian Thibodeau, I just connect to the way he teaches. I connect to the way he writes. So I'd say he's one that if he does a podcast, if he writes an article, when he puts out a book, he's somebody that I'm going to get a ton of value out of what he does. Someone like James Smith, with some of the speed information he's put out has been really good. So there's different people, that way, but it's kind of hard to say, like people want to know who's the one person. Like, if you got to learn from one person who's got like the package of basketball, like, I don't know that guy exists, that gal exists. I don't know that person exists for football. I don't know that person's out there where, hey, if you want to learn how to run a Division I basketball program or run an NBA basketball program, this is who you got to go through. But I was heavily influenced by Richard Borden, for example. Richard Borden, most people have never even heard that name, but he's a former president of the NSCA. He former head coach of the Olympic Training Hall, level 5 Olympic weightlifting coach. So essentially he could, I think, like, judge in the Olympics. Very, very high level weightlifting guy. Well, he trained me. I was the most fortunate person in the world. I got to train with him for 4 years. So a lot of how I teach things go back to his teaching progressions. How do you teach a position 1, position 2, clean, for example? How are you doing different things, and how does that carry over to an RDL? How does that carry over into a deadlift? So for me, a lot of how I teach goes back to what I learned, from one of my original mentors, Dave Scholes. There's a lot of things I learned from coaches that coached me. But, Richard Borden, and unfortunately he passed, here recently, but he was extremely influential in what I do today. So, I mean, again, I wish I could say, hey, it's this one person doing this one thing. But I would say this, Dave Scholes has been the most influential person, and has probably, you'll see his fingerprints over what I do more than anybody else. You can say the same, Charles Poliquin's fingerprints are over a lot of what I do. And again, I don't want to misrepresent that, like, me and Charles were boys kicking it on the weekend, taking shots, at the bar, something like that. That wasn't the case, but I did learn a lot from him. I learned a lot from what he taught. You look at some of the information like James Smith has put out. I'm going to butcher his name, but one of the better books that's come out has been like Mladen Jovanovic. The book he put out a couple of years ago. Tim Karen, for example, another really, really bright guy who just put out a strength deficit, essentially like manifesto of, this is everything we did, and this is how we looked at counter movement versus non-counter movement jumps on a force plate. What did that mean relative to, are you an acceleration versus a velocity guy? Looking at eccentric concentric ratios, and how do we manipulate those to drive up strength? Because what if you are an acceleration guy versus a velocity guy? How do those ratios impact that? What if you're someone who's just trying to put some size on, put some strength on? How do those ratios impact your training? And to me, when that book just recently came out, if you are a strength coach, you need to read that book. It is probably paradigm shifting for many people. But for me, I kind of read it and I was like, dude, finally somebody put this in a book, right? Like, it's stuff that it makes sense. It's intuitive. Things things a few of us have been doing for a while, but someone finally put it on paper, and I'm glad he did it. I am not smart enough to do what he did, put my thoughts on paper like that. Credit to him. He worked on that for a long time. Unbelievable book. Or even what I do, like I do it's an omni contraction style of training, so there's an eccentric day emphasis, a concentric day emphasis, an isometric day emphasis. It is not triphasic. It's somewhat similar in that there's a daily emphasis versus like a block emphasis, but there's way more different than there is in common with triphasic. That's always the first question. Oh, is that it is not triphasic. But like, I do an omni contraction style of training. There's really only two other people I know who do it or have been doing it. One of them is Christian Thibodeau. The other one is Ben Prentice. He calls his more of a quad current system, where he's kind of training all the different attributes within the week. But like, to me, that's something I do. It was very heavily influenced by Ben Prentice first. I cleaned up a lot of my thoughts doing consults with Ben Prentice. I cleaned up a lot more thoughts buying information, some different things from Christian Thibodeau. And then, I went to a seminar with Christian and got even more ways to clean it up. But it was kind of interesting because something I did that two other people were doing that not many other people are doing, I kind of came up with my own way to do it. And then I took some of the really good ideas that I was able to take from them and just clean up more and more what I'm doing. So to me, I had it explained, are you a chef or a cook? Cooks can kind of follow the recipe. Chefs just look at the shelf and say, hey, here's the ingredients. This is how these two complement each other. Let's add these ingredients. And that, I'm not going to say I'm a chef or I'm a cook or anything like that, but that's kind of how I view it, is how do I, I want to be a master of my craft. I want to view myself as a chef, not as a cook. So I try to just take a lot of information from a lot of different sources and then, apply it, make iterations of it, and then just try to make it a little bit better every year.
That's dope. I love it. I absolutely love it. I think Farr's very much the same way, and I've been able to learn a lot from him in that sense. To really wrap this up, we ask every guest this question, although I really will value your perspective on it because you're somebody that's dedicated to service of transformation as well. And, when you talk about a group of guys that's, number one in the country, or you talk about a group of guys that's all, sub 10% body fat, there's a standard, there's a set of values, I'm sure, that you guys are embodying, preaching, living every single day. When I even look at that transformation, 15 pounds over a year, I don't think what a lot of people see behind the scenes is what goes into all of that psychologically. What's the mental behind it? What are the values? What are the standards? And so I'm curious, in your lens, how have you seen the work that you do with your athletes? And let's speak about it in transformation. They're transforming over the course of the year. They're evolving as athletes, as players, strength, physique, whatever. Why are their transformations more than just physical?
You know what? Let me. I'm going to go a little bit Nick Saban-esque on
I
this,
love it.
but it's important, man.
Yeah.
One of the easiest things to do is to deal with failure, because you failed. What you did not work. So we need to make a change, and then we're going to put effort into it, be competitive with it, and then we're going to get better off of it. What's way more challenging than that is dealing with success. Okay, because once you've had success, you might get complacent, or you may forget what it took to get to that point because you've had success. You don't remember what it's like, for example, as a strength coach. There was one point in my career, and I promise this is going to come back to the athlete, right? But there was one point in my career. My wife was pregnant. I was working about 70 hours a week. I was making less than $100 a week as part of my paycheck to be a strength coach. Okay, I'm not glorifying that. I'm not trying to say, hey, I did it, so you guys need to do it. I'm not doing that. That was just the reality of the world I was living in. And I remember we went to the hospital, and up to that point, it was the worst. It was the worst day of my life, because I've got a wife, she's pregnant, and earlier that day, I'm looking at the money in my wallet. I wish I knew the exact amount, so the story would be a little bit better. But I mean, it was like $15, $17, something like that. I had no money. And I remember going through my mind saying, okay, I have enough. This is back when eggs, sometimes they go on sale 2 dozen for $1, usually, 80, 90 cents a dozen, something like that. But in my mind, I'm saying, okay, we can buy enough eggs, bananas, and ramen noodles to get us through to the next paycheck. I mean, that's just where my mind was. And then we go to the hospital, and they needed a $25 copay. And immediately I said, oh, like, we're not going to be able to eat anymore. And then I didn't know how to process. I was like, no, I need this money. But if I don't give them money, we can't go see the doctor because they need the copay first. Now, I'm kind of internally panicking. And I said to the lady, I said, hey, I don't have that. I think I have and I had maxed out all my credit cards moving to Southern Utah, because we had to get a moving truck. We had to do all these things. We had to put all these deposits down, first month, last month, security deposit, all these. So I don't even have a credit card I can tap into. I am tapped out. I got $17. And anybody knows, like, I'm going to do it on my own. I'm not going to be calling people every month asking for help. Hey, I need more money. I need more. It's just the way I work, man. So, and that's why I love my wife more than anything in the world. She is a freaking trooper, man. She is, there's a lid for every pot, and man, we go together well. But I'm sitting there, and I said, I can't do this. And I looked at it and I said, hey, I got $15. I got $17. Can I give you what I have? And I promise I'll come pay you the rest when I get it. And the lady's like, yeah, that's fine. Just give me what you got. And I remember as I'm pulling the money out, I'm like, dude, what am I going to do? I can't feed my family. And anyways, and then another lady who was sitting next to her came over, tapped her on the shoulder, said, you're fine, sir. I'm gonna freaking cry thinking about this, man. It was literally the worst day of my life. She said, you're fine. Just hold on to it. We'll get it next time. Well, you know what? That was a failure. That was something I wasn't able to provide for my family. I wasn't able to do something that I had an obligation. I will never go back to that. It's easy to learn from that failure and say, you know what? Here's what I need to do. And, I started personal training kids. So I'm a full-time coach on personal training kids. I actually started teaching classes at a massage college, the anatomy and physiology classes. I started picking up all this extra side work that I didn't want to do because I was trying to be all in on coaching. Well, you know what? That's no longer an option. So I'm going to do whatever it takes to learn from this failure and move forward. Well, hey, fast forward to today, and you're saying, hey, man, congrats. You're the number one team in America. I'll be honest, man. That's awesome. And I love that for our kids. And that's phenomenal. That speaks volumes to every kid who's helped build this program to where it is today. But again, now we're going to do the Nick Saban-esque. I work for a first ballot Hall of Famer head coach, and from the top down in our building. I don't care about the game we're going to play on Tuesday. I care that we're going to have a great day today. And to me, that's how you get kids bought in, right? And again, you can sell kids on the destination, and there's a time and a place, right? Don't sell them necessarily quite on the journey. Hey, this is where we're going to get you to. But every day you come in, and this is where I think a lot of people don't handle success well, is you forget, hey, this may not be exciting, but we're going to have a great day today. If all we're doing is lifting today, this is going to be the best lift I've ever done in my life because it's the lift we're doing now. And if we're doing a conditioning session, this will be the best conditioning session I've ever coached in my life because it's the conditioning session we're doing right now. And to me, I think that's how you handle success. Don't look ahead. Don't look down the road. Just what is right in front of you. And right in front of you is what you're doing today. And so to me, that's how you handle that. And so you can look at it and say, hey, how do you handle it with the kids' mental? How, is it about relationship building? Is it, there's so much to it, man. But what I will say is if you want to get people bought in, give them little things that they can accomplish. Give them little victories. Challenge them. Because when you overcome a challenge, you own that. I didn't give it to you. You're not renting that. You own that. So challenge guys. But then, more importantly, and probably most importantly, just be great at whatever you're doing today. Be great at that. If you got to shoot 100 free throws, that's the most important free throw you've ever shot in your life is this next one, because that's what you're doing right now. And so I think that's how you handle the success. Don't lose a chip on your shoulder. Don't forget where you came from. And that's why I love the head coach I work for. Kind of going back to what I said earlier, pick your head coach wisely if you're a strength coach. Like I want to play for that guy. If I had eligibility, I wouldn't be good enough, but that's the guy I want to play for. So that's the guy I want to work for because we value the same things. And so that's what I would say is, hey, when you're scrolling through those photos, there's another kid probably not too far away who dropped 30 pounds. And I think it was 3 or 4 months. Coming off one of the most, I won't say gruesome, but one of the worst lower leg injuries I've ever seen. This kid had it in high school, broke bones, tore a lot of tissue, had a lot of, ligament tendon damage, just a grotesque lower leg injury. Okay. Well, that kid came in, and when you have that kind of an injury, you can't move around very much, right? You're sitting on a couch, and then your rehab is getting to the point where you can walk pain-free. And then, again, he was not in a high setting or a high resource setting of sports performance. He was just at a hospital, like going through his insurance. They needed to make sure he could walk up and down stairs. And once he could do that, you've been rehabbed. So then he came into us so we could do the transitional rehab back to sport. And this kid ended up losing, again, 30 pounds quickly. But it's because cleaned up his diet, worked his butt off every single day. He was consistent. He was committed. He did things the right way. And if all we ever did was thought about down the road, hey, let's think about next year when you're playing. Let's try to get you motivated for X, Y, Z. No. I want you to be disciplined. So today, you're going to have the best training day you've ever had. If we're doing wicket runs, best wicket runs we've ever done. If we're doing acceleration, chain resistance sprints, these are the best chain resistance sprints we've ever done. And that's how I've got to approach it. If we're doing a warm-up, get them locked in on the warm-up. If we're doing hill sprints, get them locked in and make them competitive, right? And so to me, I think that's how you handle the success, and that's how you get guys committed, bought in. It's just, you obviously you're probably not going to do that if, hey, this is the best bite of broccoli I'm ever going to do in my life, right? Like there comes a point where maybe it gets a little bit overkill, but you got to approach every day of I'm worried about today. That's what matters. And I think that's how you get guys to have success.
That's it.
Fantastic, man.
That's it. Win the day.
That's it.
I love it. It's so simple, but genuinely, like I'll just say this. It's one of the most powerful messages we might have heard on this podcast, because it really is so simple, right? And it's just being able to be present with the process and enjoy it, and that's everything, man. So I really appreciate you telling that story, getting personal with us. That's genuinely what this show is all about. So I appreciate you sharing that space with us today.
Yeah, man. No, I'm really happy you had me on, man. I'm gonna ask you a question though.
Yeah.
I'll put you on the spot if you're good with that, because I like to ask this to everybody who I think is kind of a high level person in what they do.
Yeah.
What would you say? And it's asking both of you. In the last 2 years, what has been the biggest paradigm shift that you've had in anything related to training, fitness, nutrition, whatever that is, that, that's kind of part one. I'd say part two, what do you see people doing that just makes you beat your head against the wall? Stop doing that. That's not what you think it is. So I'll put you back on the spot, man, if you're okay with that.
No, totally. Bar, you want to go or me first?
I'll let you go first. I got one. He'll like the one I got.
Okay. Well, my mind immediately goes to what am I beating my head over? I'm gonna sit with the first question a little bit, and I genuinely appreciate you asking that, because you just challenged me. Now I get an opportunity to win. But what makes me beat my head against the wall is I see it every day. I go to the gym and I just see like partial range of motion and just bad technique. And I used and that used to be me. And I would always beat my head and wonder, okay, why am I not growing? Why am I not developing? Like, why am I not progressing? And it's just had to come down to me leaving my ego to the side and really focusing hard on technique and relearning my patterns and being able to lift safely and effectively. And so that's one of the things that to this day that I can't get behind is the partial stuff is in regards to hypertrophy. And that's my mind. So that's that number one.
I think that this one rings because it's been a little over 2 years since Kevin and I have been working together. And Coach, we talked about the Kevin Herter who plays for the Kings, who I get a chance to work with personally, which has been an incredible experience. But I remember the first time we met up in November of 2020, we were having a conversation and he was voicing things he was doing and like trying to figure out how to change body composition, strength, performance, recovery. Obviously an NBA season, 82 games is not college, is 30, right? You got back-to-back nights. And I remember we were walking through some stuff and there was a moment where I said something and he's like, that's such a small thing to pick on. I'm like, well, it doesn't matter if you're doing hypertrophy training, power training, strength training, speed training, technical stuff transitions at every level. Those details matter. And it's just like your free throws. If I go and watch him play now and I have a really good eye for it, I can tell you without being there why he goes on a cold streak or what's happening with his body. And I'm sure you can with your guys. And it was this like drastic shift of these simple little details that are truly just principles. Like I'm sure you have them with your training programs. Like sure, you go from power to speed to hypertrophy to strength to whatever, to aerobic conditioning, but there's principles to all of this that overlap no matter what you're doing. And it's actually the simple details and the principles that are going to drive those outcomes long term. It's not like this, hey, I'm a bodybuilder, so there's no way there's any overlap with your basketball guy, or hey, I'm a college student and there's no chance I'm any similar to the power lifter, or I'm a soccer player or a baseball player. It's like, no, it's actually the principled little details. We can get into the nuance, but if I don't have you in the right place from principled details, we're not getting anywhere. And I think for a long time in my life, it was always like, you got to be like an expert at what you do. But the beauty of the best experts is, and you've probably seen this with everybody who are like the top in sports too, they can show you the simple details and the basic principles that actually just carry over to everything. So I think for me, that biggest shift has been, what's the simple detail that's principled that's actually going to carry forward that we can address now, and then a year from now, that's not going to be the actual issue. We've already done the basics. And it seems like, oh, like do the basics, but it's actually in the details. It's not just, can you squat? It's not just, can you eat healthy? It's like, what does that look like in practice? Like even in the smallest detail.
Yeah. No, I like that. Thank you.
No, on the personal level, right? The personal paradigm. It's cool because this conversation is a very, very big reminder of it all. I'm so genuinely passionate about impact and, how can we serve our people to help them, right? How can we create results? Like I'm not sitting here on this podcast with you guys without being really, really driven by that. Beyond Milk isn't where it is today without being very, very driven by that. And in the moments where I found myself struggling the most, or when I found myself doubting myself the most, or being very, very intimidated by my own vision, being afraid even of myself, it's been when I've been so far distanced from myself. And I've been focusing so much on things outside of me or looking outside of me for my answers. And everything really started clicking once I really just started showing up for me. Once I really just started showing up for me. I always used to ask myself, like, why is this happening? Why is everything happening to me? And once I was able to learn how to take responsibility and say, hey, like, everything outside of me is a reflection of what's going on right here. And so each and every single day, what are my non-negotiables? What are the things I need to do to win the day for me? Like, what are the things I need to do to put myself in the best position I can be in for the people around me, for our athletes, for our clients? How can I be challenging myself? How can I be getting uncomfortable myself? And just understanding that, yes, I care so deeply about this mission. It starts with me. It starts with my responsibility. And at the times where the things outside of me and around me have struggled, it's always come back full circle to like, okay, like, where am I struggling? Where am I not showing up for myself? And at the end of the day, I can be so grateful for the fact that we do have a mission to serve together. And it is our greatest responsibility because, that's the thing that keeps pushing us, even on the hardest of days where we don't feel like doing it. It's like, that's the purpose. That's the reason. And I think we could call it a paradigm shift, but I think it's just a consistent reminder, that I give myself each and every single day as soon as I'm up. It's how can I show up for me first and give? How can I learn? How can I grow? How can I give? So.
That's awesome.
I'll give you a real simple one. How you care matters more than who you care for. And I say that because I think a lot of people aren't congruent in the way they approach the experience you get with them in one setting with one certain set of people is different than the other. I think the big lesson has been congruency through it. Like I make it a very big point. Who you get social media, who you'll get when you meet me, who you'll get on the phone. It doesn't matter who you are. And in a lot of ways that's integrity, yet it's also the responsibility to a collective outcome, right? If I care about him, I care about our coaches, I care about what we have to do to make the team better. The things that I may want in my life from a business standpoint, from an outcome standpoint, they're only going to be byproducts of that. Same thing with the athletes, right? Like if I care about them and I do everything I can, learn what I can, apply what I can to help them get better, the byproduct of that for me will happen, but it doesn't matter based on how I care. If I become selective and be like, oh, it's I only care about this certain person, there's inconsistency in your life. And so a big thing for me has become how you care is much more important than who you care for.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, well, look, we appreciate you. I think Chad would agree. We'd love to have you back at some point for sure. This was a fantastic episode, and thank you for the time. Like this is incredible. I'm grateful we've been able to connect, and I'm sure we're going to connect a bunch in the future.
Yeah, for sure, man. Let's if anybody listens to it and likes it, man, I'll come back on with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, no, they will. Trust me. There'll be some great feedback, I'm sure.
Well, good stuff, man. Well, hey, appreciate you guys. It was good to connect, and yeah, man, we'll have to do it again.
Thanks, boss. Appreciate
All right,
you.
man.